In this video, we're going to learn about binding to query string. Let's jump into Visual Studio here. So previously, we have learned to bind from endpoint handler parameter to root values like this. And at that time, we mentioned that this from root attribute is not actually required. So as long as the name of the parameter here in the endpoint handler corresponds to the name of the parameter in the root. So let's change this to be identical. Okay, so this works for root value, and in the same way, it also works to bind the value query strings to query strings. So to demonstrate that, I have to comment out this because otherwise the root template of this one is going to be the same as this one. So now that I commented out, I can remove this segment of the root template, and now I can go ahead and try to run it. All right. So if I go to here, of course, it's going to throw an exception because I didn't provide anything. I didn't provide the ID that is required in this endpoint handler here. So let's try. Hit enter. You can see I have the bad request. But if I provide, let's say /2, okay, and then I hit enter, this is going to 405 because I didn't provide the root template. Now, because I didn't provide the root template like that, I'm going to provide it through query string. So question mark ID equals to, and then I hit enter. You can see that the correct JSON is retrieved from the server side to the client in the browser. All right. So that means the same rule that we talk about for binding to root values applies for a query string. If the name of the query string is the same as the root parameter, I'm not the root parameter, the endpoint handler parameter, then we can use this implicit binding. Otherwise, if the name is different, then we can use explicit binding. So let's say we're going to change it back to identity number, and then copy and paste it over here. Now here we need to use explicit binding. We're going to say from query this time, from query, and then we specify the name. So name equals ID. This time it's also going to bind from the query string, the ID query string, and the query string ID to identity number like this. So let's run it, and we will see. So /employees question mark ID number, let's change to 3 this time. Now we can see that we grabbed the correct JSON. All right. Now another thing I want to mention is that remember we talked about optional root parameter should correspond to optional endpoint handler parameter. Okay. Remember we add a question mark over here if the root value, the root parameter is optional. Now for query string, because the nature of this URL here is that it's optional anyways, right? So this part, you don't have to provide it. It's a valid URL. Therefore, when you work with query string, it's better to add the question mark anyways, right? Better to add it anyways, and then you have to deal with this thing here to say if identity number has value, then we are going to move this inside. Otherwise, we're going to return null. And then here we're going to change to identity.value. Okay, so this would be recommended to have a optional endpoint handler parameter. So let's run it. What's going to happen here? So /employees question mark ID number 3. Then we're showing the correct employee information in JSON. What if I don't provide it? Then I return null instead of throwing HTTP 400 bad request. Okay, that's that. And last but not least, what if I have a root parameter just like this? Okay, I have a root parameter just like this. And I delete this explicit binding. I delete the question mark because it's required And I just use ID to correspond it, and I delete this, and I delete this. Okay, recover back to normal. Okay, as you remember, at the beginning of this video, we mentioned that the implicit binding for this parameter can be bind to root parameter, as long as the name corresponds to that. And this parameter can be also bound to query string, as long as the name is the same. What if we're providing the root parameter and at the same time we're providing query string? So let's give it a try. All right, so we're going to /employees/1, and at the same time I'm going to do ID equals 3, and then I hit enter, and you can see that the one that is pulled from the backend data store is employee number 1, which corresponds to the ID in the root parameter. So therefore, the priority of binding is that the root value takes priority comparing with query string. If the information exists in the root parameter already, then the value in the query string is ignored. It's not going to bind to the query string anymore. And let's recover the code back to binding to query string, and this is going to be your source code. And this is the end of the video. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I will see you in the next one.